You don't belong here. Move her!
That's my child. Let go!
Sit down. You're not allowed there. Cynthia Blake's hand closed around my daughter's arm as the bailiff shouted for order, the board chair already pulling like the courtroom belonged to her. The enforcer in crimson didn't ask permission. She didn't look at the judge. She just dragged. I said, "Stop." I also said something colder, quieter, that the HOA filings in her hand didn't have standing, and that I used to be the one who rejected papers like hers before they ever saw a judge. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. And for half a second, the clipboard queen hesitated. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name is Michael Harrington. I stood there with my palms open because I'd learned a long time ago that calm makes liars sloppy. I wasn't loud, I wasn't pleading. I'd spent years as a real estate litigation paralegal and a county clerk before that, watching people try to muscle their way through procedure. The tyrant in heels thought authority came from confidence and a blazer. She didn't know how much power lives in quiet rules. Ava cried out as Cynthia Blake yanked her past the gallery rail, the metal cold and unforgiving against my wrist when I reached for my kid. The sound hit me like a punch. The judge's voice cut through the room, sharp and rising, and the bailiff moved, but not fast enough to erase what had already happened. My daughter's face went white, eyes wide, breath hitching as if the air itself had betrayed her. This wasn't about fines or easements. It was about a courtroom, one place that's supposed to be sacred, being turned into a weapon. Ava had been named in filings because of a technicality after my wife died and the house transferred to both of us. Cynthia Blake saw that and smelled leverage. She'd decided a teenage girl was easier to scare than a widower who knew the system. Where are you watching from? Your kitchen table, your couch, somewhere quiet you thought was safe? Because I was standing in a room built for justice while my child was being hauled like contraband. The judge called for order again. The sound of the gavel echoed, hollow and loud, and finally the board chair released her grip. Ava stumbled back toward me, shaking so hard her teeth clicked. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and felt how light she was, how fragile. Cynthia Blake didn't apologize. The clipboard queen straightened her papers and smoothed her blazer, already rehearsing a story where this was my fault. I smelled old carpet and disinfectant. I heard murmurs ripple through the gallery. People were watching now. That mattered. I could feel eyes on the tyrant in heels, measuring the distance between confidence and cruelty. Ava's fingers dug into my sleeve, the way they used to when she was little and thunderstorms rolled in. My wife had taught her to count between flashes. She wasn't here anymore, and that promise, to protect our girl, sat heavy in my chest. Cynthia Blake had crossed a line that didn't belong to her, and she'd done it in public. The judge ordered a recess. The bailiff guided us out, his voice low, apologetic. Cynthia Blake argued the whole way, insisting she had authority, insisting Ava's distress was disruptive. Each word stacked another brick in the wall I could already see forming. I didn't chase her. I didn't yell. I held my daughter and listened to my own heartbeat slow because I knew something she didn't. Courts run on standing. Power collapses when it lies about who it is. And Cynthia Blake had just put her hands on my child in a room that never forgets. The room that never forgets followed us into the hallway, the echo of the gavel still rattling in my bones. The bailiff's hand hovered near his radio as he guided Ava and me through the courthouse doors and out into bright daylight. The air outside felt too open, too normal, like the world hadn't just watched a grown woman yank a teenager by the arm. Ava's knees nearly buckled on the stone steps. I sat her down on a bench beside a bronze plaque that listed donors, my palm on the back of her neck, feeling her skin cold with shock. Her breathing came fast, shallow. The courthouse fountain splashed nearby, cheerful and wrong. People streamed past, avoiding my eyes, until a few stopped and stared at the entrance like it might spit Cynthia Blake back out. "She did it again," an older woman whispered. I turned. Nina Caldwell stood there with a cardigan draped over her shoulders, silver hair pinned neat, eyes blazing. She wasn't from my row of houses. She was from Stonebrook Reserve, the same gated community Cynthia ruled like a private kingdom. Nina's voice carried the kind of authority that didn't need a title. "Again?" I asked. Nina nodded, stepping closer, keeping her gaze on Ava with something like tenderness. "Not the dragging," she said. "The courtroom intimidation, the liens, the threats, the way the board chair uses paperwork like a weapon." 2 more residents drifted in behind her, then 3, then 5, as if seeing Ava on that bench finally gave them permission to be visible. A man with a construction jacket rubbed his hands together, eyes darting. A woman in her 60s clutched a folder so tight the corners bent. "We got pulled into court over paint," the man said, voice cracking. "Paint. And then it was attorney fees, and then it was collections, and then she said she'd take the house. The enforcer in crimson showed up at my husband's funeral," the older woman blurted, cheeks flushing with shame and rage. "Tried to hand me a notice in the parking lot. Said grief wasn't an excuse for non-compliance." Ava's head lifted at that, eyes wet, like she couldn't believe adults could be that cruel. My stomach twisted. Cynthia Blake wasn't just strict. She was predatory. She picked moments when people were weakest and called it enforcement. I watched the courthouse doors. The clipboard queen hadn't come out yet, but I could picture her smoothing her blazer, rehearsing the story where my daughter was disruptive. In my head, I heard her tone, confident, clipped, certain the system belonged to whoever spoke loudest. Nina leaned in. "She files everything under the HOA name like it's a real corporation," she said. "But nobody's ever seen the board vote on half of it. She just acts, and people pay because they're scared." That word, corporation, hit a nerve. I didn't explain it. I didn't need to. I only asked, "Has anyone challenged her filings?" The construction man shook his head. "Who has that kind of money?" "Who has that kind of time?" the woman with the folder added, voice trembling. "She keeps it constant, so you're always tired." Ava's hand found mine. Her grip was small but desperate. "Dad," she whispered, "are they going to do this again?" "No," I said, and I meant it, even though my throat tightened. "Not to you." A door burst open, and Cynthia Blake appeared at the top of the steps, flanked by Trish Vaughn from the board. The tyrant in heels paused when she saw the cluster around my daughter. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. Then she lifted her chin and walked down like this was her courthouse, too. In that moment, I understood the real pattern. It wasn't just fines. It was performance. It was pressure. It was using fear to create silence, and silence was the only thing that kept her standing. Silence was the only thing that kept her standing, and Cynthia Blake knew it. She stopped halfway down the courthouse steps, red blazer bright against gray stone, and let her eyes rake over the small crowd like she was taking attendance. The board chair's smile was thin, practiced. Trish Vaughn hovered a pace behind, hands clasped so tight her knuckles went pale. Ava pressed closer to me. I felt her trembling through my sleeve. Cynthia Blake pointed at my daughter without looking at her. "The judge will note your disruption," the enforcer in crimson said. "You'll regret making a scene." Nina Caldwell stepped forward. "A scene?" she snapped. "You grabbed a child." The clipboard queen's eyes flicked to Nina, then away, like she didn't want to acknowledge anyone outside her target. "This community is tired of the Harringtons," she said, loud enough for passers-by to hear. "They ignore rules. They waste court resources. They manipulate sympathy." That was the move. Paint us as a problem so her violence looked like order. I kept my voice low. "Don't come near her," I said. Cynthia Blake smirked. The tyrant in heels turned her attention to her papers, as if the truth lived in whatever she carried. "We'll see you at the hearing," she said, then pivoted sharply toward the courthouse doors. And that's when I saw Daniel Ortiz. He stood in the shadow of the entrance, half hidden behind a pillar, like he'd been trying to make himself invisible. He wasn't dressed like a lawyer, no briefcase, no suit. He held a manila envelope and a lanyard with a temporary courthouse badge. His eyes tracked Cynthia Blake the way a mouse tracks a hawk. When Cynthia passed him, she didn't speak. She just tilted her head, and he moved, one step behind her, obedient. But his body told a different story. His shoulders were hunched, his jaw clenched so hard it jumped. He kept rubbing his thumb along the edge of the envelope until the paper started to fray. I'd seen that posture before. In clerks who knew a filing was wrong but didn't feel powerful enough to push back. In young paralegals who'd been threatened by aggressive counsel. Fear doesn't always look like shaking. Sometimes it looks like a person trying to shrink. I watched Cynthia Blake disappear inside, and Daniel Ortiz lingered near the doorway, caught between following and staying put. His foot tapped the stone, fast and uneven. He checked his phone, then glanced at Trish Vaughn like he wanted help and didn't expect any. I stood up slowly, careful not to startle Ava. "Stay with Nina," I murmured. Ava's fingers tightened on mine, then released. Nina's hand settled on her shoulder, steady and warm. I walked toward the entrance. The air smelled like hot stone and car exhaust. Daniel Ortiz saw me coming and froze. His eyes widened, then darted away, searching for an exit that wouldn't be obvious. "Daniel Ortiz?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer at first. His throat bobbed when he swallowed. "I'm just delivering," he said, voice thin. "I don't want trouble." "You were with her," I said. "You saw what she did." His hand shook around the envelope. He hid it by pressing it against his stomach. "I didn't touch the girl," he whispered, as if that was the only sin he could admit. "I'm not saying you did," I said. "I'm saying you know how she operates." He glanced over my shoulder toward the bench where Ava sat. His eyes softened for a split second, then hardened with fear. His foot slid back, ready to retreat. Sweat glistened at his hairline even though the wind was cool. She's not supposed to be doing this," he blurted, then flinched like he'd spoken too loudly. My pulse kicked. Not supposed to be doing what? Daniel Ortiz's lips parted, and for a moment I thought he'd tell me everything. Then Cynthia Blake's voice rang from inside the doorway, sharp, impatient, calling him. Daniel's whole body jerked at the sound. He snapped the envelope to his chest and backed up, eyes apologetic, terrified. The conflicted ally was right there, visible as a bruise. He wanted to help. He also wanted to survive. He wanted to help. He also wanted to survive. Daniel Ortiz backed through the doorway, eyes apologetic, and the courthouse swallowed him like a tide. I didn't chase him. I watched the last inch of his envelope disappear and felt the shift in my gut. There was something rotten behind Cynthia Blake's confidence. And it wasn't just her personality. It was paperwork. It was authority claimed, not granted. Ava's small shape on the bench yanked me back. I turned, crossed the plaza, and crouched beside her. Nina kept an arm around her shoulders, steady as a rail. "We're going back inside," I said. "Not to fight, to listen." The courthouse interior hit us with cold air and the smell of metal and toner. Bailiff Ron Keating waved us toward a side corridor where a sign read, "Mediation Rooms." My daughter's fingers squeezed mine until my knuckles ached, then loosened as we stepped into a cramped waiting area with beige walls and a humming vending machine. Trish Vaughn appeared first, lips tight, eyes darting. Behind her came the tyrant in heels, Cynthia Blake, moving fast like momentum could replace permission. The enforcer in crimson didn't look at Ava. She looked at me like I was an obstacle she planned to remove. "This is informal resolution," Trish said, voice thin. "Let's keep it civil." "Civil?" Nina muttered. Cynthia Blake ignored Nina. The clipboard queen dropped a folder on the small table with a smack that made Ava flinch. "Your daughter's behavior was disruptive," she said. "The judge can sanction contempt. I can request it." I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my face still. "You grabbed her," I said. "In the courtroom." "The board chair enforces compliance," Cynthia snapped. "She was interfering with proceedings." "She was sitting," I said. Cynthia's eyes flashed. "You're playing victim. You've been refusing HOA demands for months. Unapproved landscaping, an easement obstruction, repeated fines. You think sympathy changes obligations?" Ava's breathing quickened. I squeezed her hand once, slow. "My wife died," I said quietly. "We transferred the property. You know that. You used it." Trish shifted, uncomfortable. Cynthia didn't. The tyrant in heels leaned forward, lowering her voice like a threat wrapped in politeness. "Pay the balance today," she said, "or we accelerate legal fees, and the lien becomes unavoidable." There it was. Not resolve. Pressure, fear, control. Bailiff Keating cleared his throat. "Ma'am, keep your hands to yourself," he said, eyes on Cynthia. The enforcer in crimson smiled like she'd been complimented. "Of course," she replied, then slid another page toward me. "Sign this settlement, admit non-compliance, agree to an inspection. It ends today." I didn't touch it. "Who authorized you to represent the association in court?" I asked. Cynthia Blake's chin lifted. "I'm president." "That's not an answer," I said. Trish's eyes widened. Cynthia's nostrils flared. The clipboard queen's voice sharpened. It's been answered in filings. Filings can be wrong, I said. Cynthia's laugh was short, scornful. You think you're clever because you used to work here? I think you're overstepping, I said. The judge's clerk opened the door to the hallway and called for the next case. Trish hurried out, and Cynthia followed, heels clicking like a metronome. Ava stayed seated, shaking, Nina's arm tight around her. I stepped into the corridor a second later, and that's when I heard it. Cynthia Blake, just around the corner, voice low and urgent. Ortiz, you serve him today, the board chair hissed. And stop acting squeamish. The judge doesn't need to know I'm the one signing. It's fine. Nobody checks. Daniel Ortiz murmured something I couldn't catch. Cynthia cut him off. I said nobody checks. Keep moving. My stomach dropped. The courthouse lights buzzed overhead, and I stared at the corner like it was a doorway into a deeper problem. Not this time. Not for Ava. Because if nobody checked, I would. Because if nobody checked, I would. I walked away from the corner before Cynthia Blake could spot me listening, my pulse loud in my ears, my hands steady on purpose. Ava needed air, not another scene, and I needed proof that didn't rely on anyone's feelings. The public terminal area sat off the main corridor, a row of gray kiosks with smudged screens and laminated instructions. A sign read, Docket Access, Public Use. The courthouse smelled like toner and old coffee. I slid into an open station and typed in the case number from the notice Cynthia Blake had slapped on the table. My fingers knew the rhythm. I'd done this work for years, back when I wore an ID badge and told attorneys, sorry, you can't file that. Not like this. The tyrant in heels didn't know how much the system remembered. The docket loaded. Plaintiff, Stonebrook Reserve Homeowners Association, Inc., Defendant Michael Harrington. Then, 2 lines lower, a second filing listed the plaintiff differently. Stonebrook Reserve HOA Association. No Inc., no consistent entity. Same address, same signatures. My stomach tightened. That wasn't a typo. In court, names were identities. If you sued under the wrong name, you didn't just look sloppy. You could be standing in the courtroom with no legal body at all. I clicked the signature block on the complaint. Cynthia Blake had signed as authorized representative. No bar number, no attorney listed, no corporate resolution attached. Just her name, bold as if confidence could substitute for authorization. I opened the proof of service entry. Server, Daniel Ortiz. Method, personal service. Location, residence. Date and time. It didn't match. On that date, Ava and I had been at a grief counseling appointment, the first one after my wife's funeral, the kind of appointment you never forget because your whole body is raw. Cynthia Blake had built this timeline on sand, and she'd done it on purpose. I printed the docket summary, then printed the signature page. The printer spat the pages out with a hot, chemical smell. I folded them once and slid them into my folder like they were fragile, because they were. Fragile for her, powerful for us. A clerk walked past with a stack of envelopes. Her name tag read Janice Rowe. She moved like she'd seen every version of panic and refused to absorb any of it. Excuse me, I said, keeping my voice neutral. If an association is listed 2 different ways on filings, is that a problem? Janice Rowe glanced at the pages, then at me. Depends, she said. Could be harmless, could be fatal. Why? Because the person representing them isn't an attorney, I said, and she just told someone, nobody checks. Janice's eyes sharpened. She lowered her voice. If you think there's a standing issue, you raise it in court, she said. And if the entity name doesn't exist as filed, the judge will want clarity. Is there a way to verify the entity name? I asked. There's a corporate registry, Janice said. Public, she added. But don't chase it here. Keep it clean. I wrote the plaintiff names in my notebook, circled the gap, and noted the empty attorney line. In my head, I heard Judge Whitaker asking one question. Who are you, and who authorized you to be here? I nodded, heart thudding. Cynthia Blake had been banking on intimidation. She hadn't been banking on someone who knew how to read the seams in her paperwork. As I turned from the kiosk, I saw her across the corridor, red blazer cutting through the crowd. The clipboard queen scanned faces like a predator choosing a target. I lowered my eyes, walked past without flinching, and felt the first real twist of the knife. She dragged my daughter in court, but she dragged herself into a fight she couldn't posture her way out of. I walked past her without flinching and felt the first twist of the knife. She dragged my daughter in court, but she dragged herself into a fight she couldn't posture her way out of. Cynthia Blake's perfume trailed behind her, expensive. I kept moving until the doors swallowed the noise and the air hit my face. Ava made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. I caught her under the elbows and lowered her to the bench, but her eyes weren't tracking me anymore. They were fixed somewhere past my shoulder, wide and glassy, like she was still seeing that hand on her arm. Her breath came in little staccato bursts, too fast to be real air. Nina Caldwell touched my sleeve once, gentle, then pulled back when she saw Ava's jaw trembling. "Dad, I can't," Ava whispered, and the words broke apart. The bailiff had warned me about panic after courtroom incidents, but hearing it in my child's voice was different. It wasn't drama. It was the nervous system slamming a door. I didn't argue with it. I didn't tell her to calm down. I scooped her up, got her into my car, and drove to urgent care with my hands locked at 10 and 2 because I needed control somewhere. The sky was a washed-out gray. Every red light felt like cruelty. Inside the clinic, the waiting room smelled like antiseptic and wet wool. A TV murmured above plastic chairs. Ava's fingers dug into my palm hard enough to hurt, and I welcomed the pain because it kept me present. A nurse called her name. We followed down a hallway lit too bright, every surface gleaming. In a small intake room, a crisis counselor introduced herself as Talia Grant. She spoke softly, like she'd learned that volume can shatter people. She asked Ava simple questions: name, age, where it hurt. Ava couldn't answer at first, only nodded, tears sliding down without sound. Talia turned to me. "What happened today?" I told her the truth in plain terms. An HOA president, Cynthia Blake, had grabbed my daughter in court and tried to drag her away. The board chair claimed authority. The judge called recess. Now the enforcer in crimson was threatening contempt and liens. Talia's expression tightened. "That's a physical boundary violation in a high-stress environment," she said. "It can trigger acute anxiety." Ava finally spoke, voice tiny. She said I was disruptive. Talia nodded, then looked at me again. "Do you have a safe plan for tonight? No contact, no surprises?" "Yes," I said, though my throat burned. "I can do alarms, cameras, routines. I can do safe." "Good," she said, "and document her symptoms. Not for revenge, for protection. If this escalates, you'll need objective notes. Times, triggers, sleep, appetite." The word objective landed like a lifeline. Cynthia Blake ran on narratives. I could answer with facts. My phone buzzed. A new email subject flashed. Motion for contempt. Notice. The clipboard queen was moving fast, trying to turn Ava's fear into an accusation before anyone examined her standing. I turned my screen face down and forced my breathing slow. Talia saw it anyway. "Is she still contacting you?" "Yes," I said. "Then you need legal support," she replied. "And you need the court to understand this isn't theater. This is harm." Ava's hand found mine again. Her grip was weak now, exhausted. "Dad, am I in trouble?" she asked. "No," I said, and the promise came out solid. "She wants you to feel guilty so you'll stay quiet. We're not staying quiet." When we left the clinic, the air outside felt colder, but my mind felt clearer. I wasn't chasing Cynthia Blake anymore. I was going to challenge her right to be in that courtroom at all, and I was going to do it before she wrote my daughter into her story as the villain. I was going to challenge her right to be in that courtroom at all, and I was going to do it before she wrote my daughter into her story as the villain. Nina followed us to the parking lot, pressing a slip of paper into my hand. An address, a name. "Daniel Ortiz," she said. "He eats at this diner after runs. Tonight." I didn't love leaving Ava, but my sister drove over and sat with her in my living room, curtains drawn, kettle whistling, the house warm and steady. Ava stayed curled on the couch with a blanket, eyes tracking the window like it might sprout hands. I kissed her forehead and promised I'd be back before she slept. The diner sat under a flickering sign beside a highway exit. Inside, the air was thick with grease and coffee. A jukebox hummed too low to be music. I slid into a booth where I could see the door and waited. Daniel Ortiz arrived 10 minutes later, shoulders hunched, manila envelope tucked under his arm. He paused when he saw me, panic flashing across his face like a warning light. He tried to turn, but I stood and lifted my hands, calm. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "Sit, please." He hesitated, then sank into the booth across from me, keeping his back to the wall. His knee bounced fast enough to make the table vibrate. He stared at the menu without reading it. "You heard what Cynthia Blake said," I began. His eyes flicked up at the name, then down again. "Don't say it loud," he whispered. "The board chair thinks nobody checks," I said. "I check." Daniel's throat bobbed. He rubbed his thumb along the envelope edge, back and forth until the paper began to fray. "I just served papers," he said. "That's it." "You served papers that didn't match reality," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Dates, places, entity names, and today, she put hands on my daughter." Daniel flinched. His fingers clenched around the envelope so tight it bent. "I didn't touch her," he said quickly. "I know," I said, "but you know whether Cynthia Blake had authority to do what she's doing." Silence filled the booth. A waitress poured coffee at the next table, the smell sharp. Daniel's eyes went shiny, then hard, then shiny again, like he was fighting himself. "She's not supposed to represent them," he muttered, barely audible. My pulse kicked. "Say it again," he swallowed. "The tyrant in heels acts like she's the association's lawyer," he said. "But she's not. She's not licensed. And the board didn't vote on half the filings." "Who told you that?" I asked. "She told me," he said, voice cracking. "She said, 'It's fine, Ortiz. I sign, you serve, they pay.' She said, 'Judges don't check unless someone forces them.'" I kept my hands flat on the table so I didn't look hungry for it. "And the entity name?" Daniel winced. "She changes it," he admitted. "Sometimes it's Stonebrook Reserve Homeowners Association, Inc. Sometimes it's Stonebrook Reserve HOA Association. She said it doesn't matter as long as the address matches." My stomach tightened. "It matters." "I know," he whispered. "But if I push back, she calls the board and says I'm unreliable. I lose work, I get blacklisted, I've got rent." "And today?" I asked. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the window like he expected Cynthia Blake to appear in the parking lot. "Today was worse," he said. "I've never seen her grab a kid in court. I thought she'd scare you with paper, not that." He pulled his phone out with shaking hands and set it on the table between us, screen up. "I shouldn't," he whispered. "What is it?" I asked. "A text thread," he said. "From Cynthia. The clipboard queen told me to make service happen even if you weren't home. She told me to write personal because it looks stronger. She told me to say your daughter was emotional, so it sounded like contempt." My chest went cold. "You didn't." "I didn't write that part," he said quickly. "But I served what she gave me. I kept my head down." I leaned forward. "Daniel, will you tell the truth if the judge asks?" His knee stopped bouncing for the first time. He stared at the coffee, then at his own hands. "Yeah," he said, voice small but steady. "I will, because she crossed a line today, and if I don't speak, it'll be someone else's kid next." Outside authority didn't need my anger. It needed a witness. And in that diner, Daniel Ortiz finally became one. In that diner, Daniel Ortiz finally became one. I left with my hands still steady, but my insides buzzing like a live wire. Cynthia Blake had always counted on isolation. One homeowner at a time, one target at a time. Now I had something she couldn't bully, a witness willing to say it out loud. I drove straight to an attorney's office on the edge of downtown, a narrow building with frosted glass and a brass plate that read, "Kara Henley, Attorney at Law." The waiting room smelled like lemon polish and printer ink. A receptionist took my name and didn't ask why my eyes looked like I hadn't slept. Kara Henley met me in a conference room with a legal pad and the kind of attention that made you sit up. She was in her 40s, hair pulled back, jaw set. "Start at the beginning," she said, "but don't waste words." I didn't. I told her about Stonebrook Reserve, the easement dispute, the fines, and Cynthia Blake's courtroom grab. I told her about the docket inconsistencies, 2 plaintiff names, no attorney of record, Cynthia signing as authorized representative. I told her about Daniel Ortiz's admission, his phone with instructions to falsify service and paint Ava as contemptuous. Kara didn't flinch. She only asked, Do you have the prints? I slid my folder across the table. The pages made a soft thud, like something settling. She scanned them, then looked up. Standing, she said, one word, sharp. If the entity isn't properly named or authorized, they may not exist in the posture they're suing under, and if Cynthia isn't counsel, she can't represent them. She can appear as a witness maybe, but not as legal voice. She acted like she owned the room, I said. Some people do, Kara replied, until procedure slams the door. She wrote fast, motion to dismiss for lack of standing, motion to strike pleadings signed by a non-attorney, motion for protective order barring contact with your minor child, request for sanctions for misrepresentation, and referral request for courtroom interference, because the physical removal was its own problem. The words were clean, almost cold. I felt relief in that. Cynthia Blake had weaponized chaos. Kara was building structure. What about the contempt notice? I asked. Kara's mouth tightened. We respond by reframing. Ava wasn't disruptive. She was a victim. And the court will not appreciate an HOA president putting hands on a minor in a courthouse. My phone buzzed with another message from the board chair. A group email this time, sent to residents. Harrington family continues harassment. The tyrant in heels was setting the stage for public blame. Kara glanced at it and made a small sound of disgust. Good, she said. She's documenting her own malice. She's going to keep pushing, I said. Let her, Kara replied. Every push becomes evidence of pattern, but you don't engage outside writing. No in-person talks. No explaining yourself. I nodded. Daniel Ortiz will testify. Kara's eyes narrowed, thoughtful. He's key, she said, but he's also vulnerable. We need him protected. If Cynthia Blake threatens him, that matters. She drafted a witness declaration template. Simple, factual, short. He fills this out tonight, she said. Under penalty of perjury, we attach it to the motions. I swallowed. He's scared. Everyone's scared until they see the exit, Kara said. We're building the exit. She slid a second paper toward me. This is a temporary restraining request for contact, she said. It's narrow. It focuses on your daughter. It's what a judge can grant quickly. The courtroom gallery rail flashed in my mind. The cold metal, the sound of Ava's breath. Cynthia Blake had crossed the one line that courts don't tolerate, interfering with a person's safety inside the system. Kara capped her pen and looked me dead in the eye. Michael, she said, your job is not to win an argument. Your job is to put her in a position where she has to prove she belongs there. And she can't. I felt my throat tighten. When do we file? Morning, she said. First thing, before the board chair spins another story. I walked out with a plan, a folder of motions, and a strange calm. Cynthia Blake had been loud. Tomorrow, I was going to be precise. Tomorrow, I was going to be precise. That night, precision looked like a library table under harsh lights, coffee cooling beside a stack of blank statements. The county library closed late, and the quiet felt like protection. No courthouse echoes, no Cynthia Blake's heels, just paper, pens, and people who'd been carrying fear for too long. Nina Caldwell arrived first, cardigan buttoned, eyes sharp. She set her purse down like it weighed a ton. I told 3 more, she said. They're coming. They trickled in one by one, faces cautious, voices low, a widower with a cane, a couple in their 60s who kept glancing at the doors, a young mom with a toddler asleep in a stroller. None of them looked like rebels. They looked like people who'd been trained to comply. I spread Kara Henley's declaration template across the table. This isn't a speech, I told them. It's facts, dates, what she said, what she threatened, what you paid, what you feared. The widower swallowed. If I sign this, he said, the board chair will come after me. The board chair already came after you, Nina said, voice hard. That's why you're here. The man's hands shook as he picked up the pen. As each person wrote, I watched their bodies for tells. Tight shoulders, clenched jaws, the way Cynthia Blake's name made them flinch. Fear had become routine in Stonebrook Reserve. Like HOA mail was a weather system you couldn't control. I hated that. My phone vibrated. Another HOA blast email. Cynthia Blake again, calling the hearing a victory for the community, claiming Ava's outburst proved we were unstable. The tyrant in heels wasn't just trying to win a case. She was trying to brand my daughter. I turned my screen down and focused on the library table. One statement at a time. One crack in her myth at a time. Daniel Ortiz arrived late, shoulders hunched, baseball cap pulled low. He slid into the chair nearest me without meeting anyone's eyes. He looked like a man who expected punishment to drop from the ceiling. "You made it," I said quietly. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't sleep," he murmured. "You don't have to perform," I said. "Just tell the truth." Daniel's hands trembled as he filled out Kara's declaration. He wrote about Cynthia Blake instructing him to mark personal service, even when it wasn't true. He wrote about her changing the HOA entity name and telling him it didn't matter. He wrote about her saying judges don't check. Then he paused, pen hovering, and his breath hitched. "You don't have to write the part that hurts you," I said. He shook his head. "I have to," he whispered, and wrote the words anyway. That Cynthia Blake told him to describe Ava as emotional, contemptuous, disruptive. That she wanted the record poisoned. The young mom wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "That's evil," she breathed. Nina leaned closer to Daniel, voice gentler than I expected. "Thank you," she said. "You're doing what the rest of us should have done earlier." Daniel flinched at praise like it burned, but he didn't stop writing. When the last signature dried, I stacked the statements carefully, edges aligned. It wasn't dramatic, it was sturdy. It was the opposite of Cynthia Blake's chaos. At a public computer station, I logged into the state corporate registry and searched the HOA names I'd printed from the docket. The results loaded slowly, like the internet itself was hesitant. One name came up inactive, the other didn't appear at all. My pulse kicked. Standing wasn't just theory now, it was visible. Cynthia Blake had been suing under a name that couldn't even be found in the state's own system. I printed the registry results and slid them into my folder. Kara had warned me not to turn this into a scavenger hunt. This wasn't that. This was confirmation. On my way out, I looked at the people around that table, grandmothers, widowers, young parents, and realized Cynthia Blake had been surviving on one thing, everyone believing they were alone. They weren't alone anymore. And in the morning, when I walked into the clerk's office with motions, declarations, and proof that the tyrant in heels didn't belong in court, the system would finally have to look. The system would finally have to look. Morning came with a pale sky and a tight knot under my ribs, but my hands didn't shake when I stepped into the clerk's office. The air inside was cold and dry, smelling of paper dust and toner. People waited with manila folders like shields. I held mine close. Declarations, registry printouts, docket pages, and a promise I'd made to Ava when she asked if that woman could do it again. My sister stayed with my daughter at home, curtains open for daylight, cocoa cooling on the table. Ava had whispered that Cynthia Blake could still make the judge mad. I'd told her the truth. The tyrant in heels could try, but the court only listened to parties who belonged there. Today, I was going to force the court to ask Cynthia the question she'd been dodging since she walked into our lives. When my turn came, Clerk Janice Rowe looked up, eyes flicking from my folder to my face, reading the strain people carry when law stops being theoretical. "Case number?" she asked. I gave it. The keyboard clicked. "Filing today?" "Yes," I said. Motion to dismiss for lack of standing, motion to strike pleadings signed by a non-attorney, and a protective order request for my minor child. Janice's gaze sharpened at Minor. She slid a form toward me. "Sign and initial the exhibit list." I wrote slow and neat. The pen scratches sounded too loud. Across the room, voices rose at the records window. Cynthia Blake's voice cut through like a blade, bright, confident, wrong. The board chair stood there in her crimson blazer, waving a packet as if speed could replace authority. Trish Vaughn hovered beside her, pale and stiff. Daniel Ortiz lingered behind them, head down, hands clenched around an envelope, looking like he wanted the floor to open. Cynthia laughed. "We're filing emergency contempt. He's harassing the association." Janice didn't look up, but her jaw tightened. She stamped my first motion with a heavy thud. Filed. The sound hit my chest like oxygen. For a second, I pictured Ava's wrist in Cynthia's grip, the way her breath had stuttered like a broken metronome. I pictured the gallery rail, cold metal, the judge's voice slicing through panic. This was why standing mattered. Paper could stop hands, ever again. I slid the next motion forward. Exhibit A shows the plaintiff name changes, I said. Exhibit B is the state registry search, one name inactive, the other not found. Janice's eyes dipped for a heartbeat. I'll attach as provided, she said carefully. Clerks didn't argue facts. They made sure the system could see them. Cynthia noticed me then. The clipboard queen's head snapped toward my window, her smile snapping back into place like armor. She strode over, heels sharp on tile, and leaned close enough that I caught her perfume and the heat of her anger. "This won't save you," the enforcer in crimson said. "The judge already saw your daughter's behavior." I kept my voice flat. "The judge saw you put hands on a child," I said. "Now she'll see who's allowed to sign." Cynthia's nostrils flared. "I am the association." "No," I said softly. "You're a person pretending to be one." Janice cleared her throat. "Sir, ma'am, step back. Filing only." The tyrant in heels smiled like Janice was furniture. "Fine," Cynthia snapped, turning to Trish. "We'll have counsel drafted if we need to." That was the crack, not we have counsel. If we need to. Janice stamped my final pages. Filed, filed, filed. She handed me receipts, and my phone buzzed with a docket alert, hearing set. The timeline tightened, no longer Cynthia's to control. I gathered my folder and walked out into the brighter hallway. Behind me, the board chair's heels kept clicking, but the sound had changed. It wasn't dominance anymore. It was someone running out of room. It wasn't dominance anymore. It was someone running out of room. The hearing landed on the docket for the next afternoon, and by the time I brought Ava through security, Stonebrook Reserve had shown up. The gallery filled with women in cardigans, retirees, and a few parents at the back. Nina Caldwell sat front row, spine straight. Trish Vaughn sat behind Cynthia Blake, looking brittle. Daniel Ortiz hovered near the side door, hands clenched. Cynthia Blake took counsel table like it belonged to her, red blazer, chin high. The board chair leaned toward the microphone before Judge Marlene Whitaker even looked up. "Your Honor, we move for contempt." Judge Whitaker lifted one finger. The air went thin. "Ms. Blake," she said, "are you a licensed attorney in this state?" The enforcer in crimson smiled like the question was rude. "I'm the HOA president. I'm authorized." "That wasn't my question," Judge Whitaker said. Ava's hand clamped around mine. I felt how cold her fingers were. Cynthia Blake's eyes flicked to my daughter, then back to the bench. "No," she said, clipped. "I'm not an attorney." "Then you will not argue motions," the judge replied. "You may testify if called. You may not represent a corporation. Do you understand?" The tyrant in heels opened her mouth, then shut it. "Yes," she said. Kara Henley rose. "Your Honor, we filed a motion to dismiss for lack of standing, and a motion to strike pleadings signed by a non-attorney. We also seek a protective order for the minor." Judge Whitaker's gaze moved to Ava. "Young lady, are you okay to be here?" Ava swallowed hard. I wanted to come," she whispered. "Then nobody touches you in my courtroom," the judge said, eyes cutting to Cynthia Blake. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Kara handed up exhibits, docket pages showing 2 different plaintiff names, a state registry printout showing one entity inactive and the other not found, the signature block where Cynthia called herself authorized representative. Judge Whitaker read in silence, turning pages slowly. "Stonebrook Reserve Homeowners Association, Inc., the judge said, then tapped the next page. "Stonebrook Reserve HOA Association. Which is it?" Cynthia Blake straightened. "It's the same community." "Corporate identity is not a nickname," Judge Whitaker replied. "Do you have proof of incorporation and board authorization for these filings?" Cynthia's jaw worked. She glanced at Trish Vaughn. Trish stared down at her hands. Kara kept her tone level. "We also have a sworn declaration from the process server regarding service instructions." Daniel Ortiz stepped forward like his shoes were glued. He held his paper with both hands, knuckles white. Cynthia Blake's stare hit him like a command. "Don't." Judge Whitaker's voice softened, enough to steady him. "Mr. Ortiz, are you under oath?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, voice shaking. "Did Ms. Blake instruct you to mark service as personal when it wasn't?" Daniel's throat bobbed. Yes. The gallery gasped, then silenced itself. Ava's breath hitched beside me, and I squeezed her hand once, slow. Judge Whitaker's face hardened. "Ms. Blake," she said, "did you take hold of this child in my courtroom yesterday?" Cynthia tried to rise on indignation. "I was maintaining order." "Answer the question," the judge snapped. The clipboard queen swallowed. "I took her arm." Judge Whitaker leaned forward. "This court does not belong to private associations," she said. "I am considering sanctions, dismissal for lack of standing, and referral for courtroom interference. You will not contact this minor again." Cynthia Blake's color drained. The tyrant in heels looked toward the exit, calculating distance. Judge Whitaker lifted the gavel. "Recess," she said. "I'll issue my ruling shortly." As people stood, whispers surged, and I saw Cynthia Blake press her lips together like she was trying not to shake. Kara touched my elbow. "Stay close," she murmured. "If the judge grants dismissal," Cynthia's world collapses in one sentence. If the judge grants dismissal, Cynthia's world collapses in one sentence. Kara's words hung in the hallway while the gallery spilled into a restless cluster. Ava leaned into my side, exhausted, but she didn't look small anymore. She looked like someone who'd survived something and refused to disappear. The courtroom doors opened again. We filed back in. The air felt heavier, as if the room itself knew the next words would change lives. Cynthia Blake sat rigid at counsel table, hands clasped too tight. The clipboard queen staring straight ahead like she could stare the facts into obedience. Trish Vaughn kept twisting a tissue. Daniel Ortiz stood near the side, shoulders squared now, fear still there but no longer steering him. Judge Marlene Whitaker took the bench and didn't waste motion. "I've reviewed the filings and the sworn declaration," she said. "The plaintiff's identity is inconsistent, and the pleadings were signed and advanced by a non-attorney purporting to represent a corporate entity. That's improper." Cynthia Blake's mouth opened, then closed. The tyrant in heels looked like she wanted to argue, but her earlier, "No, I'm not an attorney," had already shut that door. "On standing," the judge continued, "the court cannot proceed when the party before it is not properly established and not properly represented. The motion to dismiss is granted. The pleadings are struck. The protective order is granted. Ms. Blake, you will have no contact with this minor, directly or through the association." Ava's breath left her in a shaky whisper. Nina's hand covered her own mouth. Relief rippled through the gallery like warmth. Judge Whitaker's gaze sharpened. "Now," she said, voice lowering, "we address what happened in my courtroom. Ms. Blake, you admitted you took hold of this child. You also directed a process server to falsify the manner of service. You repeatedly represented yourself as authorized legal counsel. Those actions are not HOA enforcement. They are interference with court process." Cynthia Blake's face went slack. The board chair looked toward Trish Vaughn as if begging for rescue. Trish looked away. "I am referring this matter to the district attorney for review of criminal contempt, obstruction, and related offenses," the judge said. "Based on the conduct described and the potential counts, you are facing significant exposure. In this jurisdiction, the aggregate maximum is 20 years. The words landed like a collision. For a heartbeat, the courtroom was silent. Then the murmurs broke out. Stunned, disbelieving, hungry for air. Cynthia Blake's shoulders sagged as if gravity finally remembered her. The enforcer in crimson blinked fast, eyes wet, then hardened again, but it was too late for performance. Reality had caught her. Court security stepped closer. Not dramatic, just procedure. The same kind of quiet procedure she'd tried to fake. Kara touched my arm. "It's not a sentence today," she murmured. "It's the judge putting the number on the record. That's a warning and a roadmap." I nodded, heart pounding, but my mind was strangely calm. Ava squeezed my fingers, and for the first time since Cynthia Blake grabbed her, I felt her grip steady instead of desperate. Outside on the courthouse steps, the crowd gathered in the bright afternoon light. Neighbors hugged. Nina spoke to other residents like a general organizing aftermath. Daniel Ortiz stood off to the side, shaking, then wiped his face and lifted his chin when I thanked him. Trish Vaughn left quickly, already thinking about how to save the association from what Cynthia had done. Ava turned her face toward the sky, blinking like she couldn't believe the sun still existed after yesterday. "Dad," she whispered, "she can't touch me again." No, I said, throat tight. Not here, not anywhere. As we walked to the car, I thought about the courtroom rail, the boundary Cynthia Blake violated, the line the judge restored. The system had looked, the system had spoken, and my daughter had learned something no teenager should have to learn but will never forget. Power isn't the loudest person in the room. Power is what holds when the room goes quiet. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.